all for coming out tonight for our discussion, Writing Race and Resistance. I think Lee covered it well, so I won't reiterate, but suffice it to say, it was a very wonderful and fortuitous meeting. My part of my team, Pamela, VIP on my team, helped make this connection, so I'm grateful to you for that and for being here. And I am here in my capacity as the executive director of 1455, which is a nonprofit literary arts organization designed to be a writer's retreat and community space in Winchester, Virginia. We're in the process of renovating some old buildings. And frankly, I'm really not here to talk that much about the organization. I'm happy to talk more about that after. I can guide you to our website. But the purpose of tonight is me taking advantage of my wonderful opportunity to surround myself with much smarter, better writers and articulate people with amazing experience. So it made a lot of sense to kick off an event when we talked about 2020. Based on the history of this remarkable venue, it made all the sense in the world to try to do something to commemorate Black History Month. And I hope that we're able to contribute some different perspectives, and I want this to be an interactive. We certainly have baked time in for Q&A at the end, but if you have questions or comments throughout, I don't think anyone would mind answering questions and keeping this engaged, so it's actually a conversation. I'd like to introduce my fellow panelists. To my immediate right is Terry Ellen Cross Davis. She is the author of A More Perfect Union, the 2019 Journal Charles Wheeler Poetry Prize, a forthcoming publication from Ohio State Imprint in 2021. She's also the author of Haint, winner of the 2017 Ohioana Book Award for Poetry. She's received fellowships to attend Cave Canem, the Virginia Center for Creative Arts, Hedgebrook, the Community of Writers Workshop, and the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown. She's the 2019-20 HOCO Politzo Writer-in-Residence, adjunct professor at George Washington University, and the poetry coordinator for the Folger Shakespeare Library. Thanks for being here, Terry. To my far left is my friend Holly Karapatakova. Her poetry, prose, and translations have appeared widely in print and online. She's the author of Words We Might One Day Say, winner of the 2010 Washington Writers Publishing House Poetry Award, and Towline, winner of the 2016 Vern Rutzela Poetry Contest from Cloudbank Books. Her current manuscript projects, Still Life with White and Planter's Wife, grapple with the deep wounds left by our history of racism, slavery, and environmental destruction. She holds an MFA in creative writing and teaches at Marymount University. To my immediate left, many of you may know, Eugene Ethelbert Miller, best known as E. Ethelbert Miller, who is an African-American poet, teacher, and literary activist based in Washington, D.C. He's the author of several collections of poetry and 2 memoirs, the editor of Poet Lore magazine, and host of the weekly WPFW morning show, On the Margin. So I've got some brief opening remarks to set the stage, I hope, for what I think will be a good free-ranging discussion where we will intentionally have some very different and probably naturally overlapping perspectives. Aside from my role as founder and executive director of a nonprofit writing organization, I'm also a writer. Much of my poetry and a great deal of musical criticism I've published over the years concerns itself with one of my largest passions, which is jazz music. Alongside the blues, this is America's signal artistic invention, yet both have very deep roots in African history and tradition. And how I came to be a white man writing about obscure jazz musicians is really part and parcel of how I came to be a white man listening to jazz and blues. But, and I suspect that this will be a recurring theme tonight, it is, as they say, complicated. If you approach art and life from the perspective of seeing all experience as a proverbial melting pot, there are or should be no boundaries. But that's easier said than done, as history shows us. The living owe it to those who no longer can speak to tell their story for them. That's a quote from Czesław Miłosz, one of the great artists of the last century, a Polish poet and professor. He appreciated literature from both angles, the creation of it as a writer and the appreciation of it as a reader. Having seen some of the atrocity humankind was capable of during his lifetime, his work uses words to elegize, accuse, and above all, remember. His great obsession was doing his part to ensure that the suffering and the bravery and the cruelty were a little less possible to ignore and forget. Personally, this has, for me, the topic we're talking about tonight, always transcended black and white or even the intersection of race relations and aesthetic concerns. Rather, it's part of a much broader and encompassing cause. I think most of us make that determination fairly early on. As an artist and a citizen, the life we take is our political voice. As such, you're committing to being all in as it relates to opposing any form of injustice and ignorance, and advocating for justice and awareness. And this imperative cuts across sexual identity, racial identity, and any and all inherent privileges. Thus, while being very cognizant and respectful of different voices that have historically ignored or actively suppressed and co-opted, we find allies and kindred spirits, and this work must function on artistic and cultural levels. It becomes a mantra and mission statement, a way to create and interact, a way to live. Which brings me to my friend and one of my personal heroes, Ethelbert Miller. When we put together the idea and the topic for this, the first person I thought of was a man that I look to as an artist and a human being, as a role model, an influence, and a voice of both sanity and compassion. So I'm very honored to have this entire panel here. I'm very honored to call this man a friend, and the first person I want to pass the mic to so he can give us some high-level thoughts and some personal thoughts is Mr. Miller. So with that, so you have your own.
Thank you very much. I'm going to do something that I hope, if I give me a word of time, okay, so I will respect it. I started writing, after my first poetry reading was right down the street at All Souls Church, 1969. I was on a program with Karen Rogers, Askia Muhammad Touré, E-Bomb, and the jazz musician Marion Brown. I say that because at that time I was like 17, turning 18, and all of a sudden, because of those names I just mentioned, I was pulled into, not the Unitarian Church, but I was pulled into the Black Arts Movement. And so the writers I was reading that was shaping my views on writing were people like Ron Karenga, Amiri Baraka, Don Leo, Haki Matabuti now, and Nikki Giovanni. I mention those names because those are the names I was reading as a young writer. But the backdrop to those writers, and it should not be forgotten, was the whole battle over the black aesthetic. So when we talk about resistance, there were individuals who were providing us, or trying to provide us with a theoretical framework in terms of resistance. And keep in mind, this is taking place in terms of the black movement, which is divided into people who are looking at the political side of things and people looking at the cultural side. So if you go back to that history of why Karenga was fighting the Black Panthers, is because Karenga was saying the first battle is a cultural battle, you know, in terms of you have to win the minds of the people before you do anything else. The Panthers were saying, look, we're running around behind the police and we don't have no time to wear dashiki. Anyway, but if you look at my reading in '69, that first reading that I'm having at All Souls Church, it comes after 1968, which is the assassination of Martin Luther King. That becomes a very important point of departure because it changes black writers. Let me read you Nikki Giovanni. This is Reflections on April 4th, 1968. What can I, a poor black woman, do to destroy America? This is a question with appropriate variations being asked in every black heart. There's one answer: I can kill. There's one compromise: I can protect those who kill. There's one cop-out: I can encourage others to kill. There are no other ways. The assassination of Martin Luther King is an act of war. That's Nikki Giovanni, you know, who has, I think, tenure at Virginia Tech today. you can see the journey. I say that because what happened, King's death changed a lot of things. But if we go back to 1963, okay, we see that the Birmingham bombing in September 15, 1963, that's where the black community really begins to change. That one where the 4 girls were killed violated the thing in terms of the church as a sacred place, the innocence of children, And even if somebody was an old person in the community, they'd say this was enough. But there's another thing to look at, is that the bombing of Birmingham occurred only a few days after King's I Have a Dream speech in August 26, 1963. Okay, so you see how this thing is built. 63. In 64, you have a major riot in Harlem. Okay, one person whose life will be changed by that riot in Harlem will be the writer June Jordan. Okay, when you get to 65, now it becomes very key, because then you have the watch riot. There was articles about the watch riot about watch explode, because watch didn't look like the typical ghetto. Okay, you know, it's California trees. So what happened? People began to raise a question: was Watts a rebellion, a riot, or a revolution? Okay, those are the three words that came out. You also know that out of the Watts riot will come the Watts Riots Workshop. It will give people like Quincy True, Jane Cortez, a whole bunch of Stanley Crouch, a whole bunch of people coming out at 65. By 66, you have the Black Power movement. Okay? The Willie Briggs and Stokely Carmichael. So you see things heating up. Then 67, you have rise around the entire country, and then you get 68. Okay? Now all this is shaping black culture. Okay? When I go back to, I mentioned about the black aesthetic, people like Larry Neal, Addison Gale, my mentor Stephen Henderson, they were all trying to figure out a way of resistance through culture. Okay, resistance through culture. So that's something that should not be overlooked. Now, I personally feel that views about race are influenced by the emotion of history and therefore are not static. For the individual poet who writes about race, there should be some sort of act of transformation. If you are tackling poems about race, after you write those poems, you should be transformed. Okay? I tell people when I'm dealing with a memoir workshop, if you write your memoir, wherever you want to start it, you know when you get to the end, you're still living. Okay? But hopefully something happened as you went back and looked over your life. Actually, the same situation when you're writing and tackling an issue like race. Okay? Then the thing comes in terms of one, resistance should be linked to resolving conflicts. Okay? And resistance often beckons that the writer must become a witness. Okay? And so you're a witness of situations in terms like police brutality. Okay? This is something that Baldwin uses. Baldwin defined himself as a witness. Okay? And he would emphasize the fact that a witness is different from an observer. See, we could be the UN, we go and observe, right? Like Rwanda, you know, we're the UN, right? We're just observing, we're not getting involved. But if you say, I'm a witness, okay? You know, coming out of the church, you have to give testimony, you have to testify. And this is why back in like 94 in DC, the crack epidemic, you couldn't find a witness. You know, somebody said, well, I was at the potter's house, I didn't see nothing. You know what I'm saying? Because what happened, that demands courage and speaking up. I just want to show you, and also, Sakai in poetry, if you're going to testify and speak truth, then you bring a writer associated with the Black Arts Movement, like Mary Evans, who would always encourage you to speak the truth to the people. Okay, so I'm just using these writers so you can see that. Let me just skip over some things and show you the tradition that we're operating in. I interviewed Cornelius Eady on my show a couple weeks ago, and Cornelius wrote the foreword to the collected poems of Sterling Brown. And that was a collection that was edited by Michael Harper. Now, I think it's a Harper and Row book. Now it's being reprinted by Northwestern University Press. So they asked Cornelius to write a new foreword. The book consists of an introduction, a preface by Michael Harper, and a long introduction by Sterling Tucker. Okay, but Cornelius did something that was very interesting, and I read his foreword. He looked at Sterling Brown's work in a way that a lot of people didn't look at it. Okay, he went immediately to sort of like the militancy of Sterling Brown. Okay, and when you look at what Cornelius writes in his short foreword, you begin to realize why, after Sterling Brown's book, Southern Road, he had a problem getting published. Because a lot of his poems, like 30s and 40s, is about police brutality and fighting back. And I'm going to read a poem which was my favorite Sterling Brown poem, and then I'll just read one poem of mine and pass the mic. This was my favorite Sterling Brown poem. And this is a poem that, before I met Sterling Brown, this would be his closing poem. When I got to Howard in like 68, 69, he would always end his readings with strong men. But before that, he used to read, his last poem would be this poem. That's my favorite poem. Old Lamb. I talked to Old Lamb, and Old Lamb said, they weigh the cotton, they store the corn. We only good enough to work the road. They run the commissary, they keep the books. We gotta be grateful for being cheap. Whippersnapper clerks calls out of our name, we got the same mister, the spinning boys. They make our figures turn somersault, we buck in the middle, say thank you, sir. They don't come by one, they don't come by two, but they come by tens. They got the judges, they got the lawyers, they got the jury rolls, they got the law. They don't come by ones. They got the sheriffs, they got the deputies. They don't come by twos. They got the shotguns, they got the rope. We get the justice in the end. And they come by tens. Their fists stay closed, their eyes look straight. Our hands stay open, our eyes must fall. They don't come by ones. They got the manhood, they got the courage. They don't come by twos. We got to slink around hangtail hounds. They burn us when we dogs, they burn us when we men. They come by tens. I had a big buddy, 6 foot of a man, muscle look perfect, game to the heart. They don't come by ones. Outworked and outfought any man or 2 men. They don't come by twos. He spoke out of turn at the commissary. They gave him a day to get out of the county. He didn't take it. He said, come and get me. They came and got him. And they came by tens. He stayed in the county. He lays there dead. They don't come by ones. They don't come by twos. But they come by tens. Let's do it, right? I'm just going to end with this. I'll read one poem. This is a book, Poetry and Prose. This is a beautiful book, about Charles Sutton. But anyway, this is by Michael Ward and Philip Cushway. And you name the writer in here with fantastic photos and commenting on issues of race. And it's a book that you might want to look at. Okay, I'll have it here. You can check it out. I'll just read this one poem because it's a way of thinking about race. I dedicated this poem to my friend Charles Johnson, who's he wrote Middle Path. He's one of the leading Buddhists in the country. And so these are outgrowth of actually little things. I just like to mess with him because he's so serious. And you can't have a love life through emails. You can't have arguments through email because people just don't get it. You know what I'm saying? You're not there to explain. And so Charles was trying to figure out what the hell are you talking about, Ethelbert? But I did put them all together, and I took one of these Phillis Wheaton titles. It's called "The 10 Race Cones," as presented to Charles Johnson on the morning of July 13, 2008. And these are ways of meditating on race. 1, why is the cotton white and the hands black? 2, how come our ears are always open, but we can't hear the sound of freedom? 3, what's the difference between the color line and the starting line? 4, I have a dream and you have a dream. Do we share the same dream? 5, is sitting in the dark the best way to celebrate blackness? 6, a blind black man boards a bus. What do you notice first, his blindness or blackness? 7, do you ever wonder what Stevie Wonder wonders? 8, when Du Bois called Garvey a Negro with a hat, what was he wearing? 9, when a black fist causes a black eye, is this black power? 10, red, white, and blue, red, black, and green, what do colors mean? Thank you.
So we, of course, as panelists will do before events like this, want to kind of get someone on the same page. So we kicked around some tentative questions and ideas, and one of the questions I think we can all riff on a little bit, and I'd love to start with you, Terry, it's a very simple and very complex question. which is what are the challenges writing about race from either a historical or personal perspective?
I think the challenge for me is authenticity. I think the challenge for me is authenticity. Because I want to make sure that I'm not